All right, so I just want to welcome you to the 8th through high school Q&A panel session. To those who are here live and to those who are watching this via recording, we're glad you're here for whatever reason, just to check this this grade level out in terms of homeschooling, whether you're new or whether you're a seasoned homeschooler. Okay, so let's go over here. Why are we doing this? We are doing this to give back to the homeschooling community. There's so many new homeschoolers, but there's also seasoned homeschoolers who are stepping into a new season of homeschooling. High school is a little different than what you've had before. So I'm glad that we've got 8th graders on here, maybe people who have 7th graders and even younger, who can now get a view into, all right, what does it mean to homeschool during high school and what's the transition? So we've been in your shoes in terms of homeschooling these grade levels. I was not doing this during COVID back then, but the rest of the panelists are currently still homeschooling. So this is something they're dealing with as well. But many of them have homeschooled through high school prior to COVID time. So it's a little bit of a different time now, but hopefully what we're going to share with you will encourage you and give you a lot of information on just what to do during this time frame of 8th through high school. And we're just passing it on, paying it forward, because we learned from others along the way, and we're hoping that we can do that for you, lighten your load, relieve some of the pressure that you may be feeling. So meet the panelists. So Lisa Rylage, she has homeschooled for 17 years, has 3 sons, 2 are in college, 1's in high school. As a military family, they moved around the world having homeschooling adventures in Germany, Hawaii, Japan, California, and Virginia. Lisa has a bachelor's in English, a master's in education, and a graduate certificate in independent educational consulting. She's the owner of Admissions Decrypted and has a Facebook group of the same name. So if you want to contact her or connect with her, she's a great resource for things that have to do with, as an educational consultant, she does a lot with college planning and admissions process. So she helps high school students and their families navigate that. So welcome to Lisa. Kimberly Millhouse, she's been homeschooling for 21 years, 4 boys and a girl. She graduated 3 who went on to college. 1 is now in law school. The 2 at home are a junior in high school and a 4th grader with learning disabilities, severe dyslexia, and ADD. It had never been Kimberly's desire or skill set to be a teacher, but she realized that homeschooling wasn't doing school at home, but rather more about learning alongside her kids and tutoring them toward a love of learning, not just about teaching the required subjects. So God has used this process to prove himself bigger than her inadequacies and to build beautiful relationships within her family. And she went from not being skilled to do what she thought was teaching her kids at home to doing it for 21 years. So welcome to Kimberly, and thank you for being here. Christine McCurdy. Christine had started homeschooling over 20 years ago and has since graduated 3 of her boys from Homeschool High School, has 1 son at Potomac Falls High School, and continues to homeschool her 5th grade daughter. The boys who graduated already from high school have received 2 Ivy League admissions, multiple Service Academy admissions, ROTC scholarships, and an NCAA D1 athletic scholarship. They are in college now, and another son went straight from high school to professional apprenticeship. And I'm Kathleen Rumford. I homeschooled my 2 daughters from 2000 to 2014 through high school, through dual enrollment. And although it's not easy, it was the most rewarding experience of my life thus far. My oldest daughter has a master's in Spanish sociolinguistics. The younger, who struggled through school with a mild processing delay, she was a creative, just thought differently than I do. She earned her bachelor's in creative advertising and business last year. I continue to support the homeschooling community through teaching high school personal finance classes, which I've been doing for 10 years, to homeschoolers. And I have 2 Facebook groups, Homeschool High School Support Group and Katalytic Kids, which I seek to help parents empower their kids towards a godly character through financial literacy, contentment, and a strong work ethic. So I just want to say that although I'm the one who kind of spearheaded setting this up, without these panelists, who I thank greatly ahead of time, and I'm going to thank greatly at the end, we wouldn't have this. So I really, really appreciate the panelists. Let me just show the panelists up here. And thank you guys for being here. Go ahead and give a wave because I now have you on the recording. Okay, so let's talk about our topics. Kimberly's going to kick off our first topic about teen ownership of their homeschooling journey, not just their homeschooling journey, but their high school journey. Kimberly, would you mind kicking that off for us?
Sure. I had my first son was, I've homeschooled from the very beginning. So, I really empathize with the parents who are having to all of a sudden figure out how to do this in the midst of COVID. That's got to be incredibly challenging to be switching gears like this, especially for the high school age. But I do want to encourage you that you can do this. I think Christine made a comment earlier when we were talking that it's not rocket science, and it's not. I do not have a degree in teaching. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Communications and Journalism, and so teaching is not my forte. I don't like to teach kids. But I love teaching my kids. I love homeschooling my children. And that is, God has given me some incredible kids. And that's what I've taken ownership of, is being fully responsible for their education. And if you're being called to that place right now, whether it's, you were already thinking about this, or whether it's through COVID sort of forcing the issue, or you just kind of like, wow, I have to do this because this is not going to work out well for the high school situation with COVID this year. Whatever the reason is, I just want to encourage you that you can do this. This is not beyond your scope of abilities, regardless of your training or your lack of training, or your training in another area. But I think just as we have to take ownership of our children's education, because it starts there, right? It starts with us. We have to believe that we're responsible for this ultimately. We're responsible to God. We're also responsible to our husband, to our children, and also to society, to educate our children well. And as we take ownership of our role in teaching our kids, we have to encourage and train and teach our teens to take ownership of their own homeschooling journey. If you're going to homeschool for it to work and be successful, having a conversation with your teen or preteen in the very beginning, I think, is a really important part of this, because you can do this and force this on them, and if they're not really owning it, it's not going to go so well. I had my oldest son was a really good student, very independent learner, very self-motivated. My second son struggled with school. We think now that I've diagnosed my youngest son with severe dyslexia, we think my second son probably had dyslexia as well, and that's what complicated his learning process. But 20 years ago, we didn't have the same resources that are available to us now to have these things diagnosed. But he didn't really own his education in high school, and it was really falling on me to really drag him through it. And I'm going to tell you that it was really difficult time. So I think having this conversation with your son or daughter in the very beginning is really essential to having a successful homeschooling experience in high school. Otherwise, you're wasting your own time, and you're also wasting their time that they could be being educated if they don't realize that this ownership is essential, and you'll end up banging your head against the wall. So I think this homeschooling high school has to begin with a relationship. I know that when you're sending your son or daughter off to school and they're doing a lot of that independently apart from you, living life sort of apart from you, and they're doing their schoolwork apart from you, you're not really involved. This is a completely different scenario, and I think it really has to begin with a positive, interactive and transparent relationship with your child. I think that's the foundation that has to begin with homeschooling high school.
To get this back, my first daughter, she kind of embraced her high school experience after when I took her out of school in second grade and had to write a pro-con list for public school and homeschool because she was not happy in second grade. When I took her out, she felt like she was being punished. But after she wrote the pros cons list, and then we got her involved with other people and community and stuff like that, she embraced it, and we saw a huge change in her happiness and her kind of coming back to being a loving child, the different things for the reason bringing her home. But my younger child, who did have a mild dyslexia processing delay, she said to me before she even got into high school, she said, "Mom, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to handle high school. It's just getting harder and harder." So I did get her tested, and they did, diagnose a mild processing delay. And so I could have gotten her extra time with the outside teachers and things like that, but she didn't want that. So I did end up kind of pulling her through, but she owned it. She knew that this was going to be the hardest part of her life getting through biology and chemistry and some of these things that just were so hard for her memorizing. She's an auditory versus a visual learner. So even though it was hard, and I did have to kind of drag her through a little bit and help her through some of that in a different way than I did with my older daughter, she did know that once she got to like her major kind of things and her creative outlets and things that she wanted to do, whether she was doing them on the side in high school, but in college, when she got past the gen eds and some of the required courses that were more difficult for her, she was going to thrive, and she did. And we did a lot of stuff on auditory stuff to get her through. So having your child recognize their strengths, their weaknesses, and talking through those, like really saying, so that they can embrace the kind of high school journey that they're looking toward, and then doing the best you can with it. I think is really helpful. Do any of the panelists want to contribute to that?
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think there's a huge difference between having a student who's willing, interested to learn, and nurturing them and optimizing their learning environment and helping them learn. And if you have someone who is diametrically opposed to homeschooling in high school, those are very different situations. And if you have a student who is diametrically opposed to homeschooling through high school, I would not recommend going this route. So there's a huge difference. You can have a student who struggles to learn, and pulling them through or nurturing them through is not the same as waking up every day and going to war. And I would not recommend, if you have somebody who has decided that every morning it's going to be war, let them go. It's not going to work. So just, I'd like to clarify that distinction. So
yeah, great point. You have to be good to you. From the young age, giving yourself breaks, but even in the older ages, it's not worth the sacrifice of the relationship, which is what Kimberly was saying. It's not worth battling every day, which then will also take a toll on yourself and your own health probably, and potentially if you have other kids that you're homeschooling. So that's a very good point.
Kathleen, can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
I also think that 8th grade, as you're considering that 9th grade transition to high school, be very clear-eyed about what you will have access to and not have access to in your area. There are some states, including Virginia, where access to extracurriculars and sports is restricted. So if you have a would-be football player, there will be no way for them to do that sport. If you have a swimmer, they can do club sports. That's an easy trade-off. They may not be able to have the same access to school newspaper, to drama. So know what's available and what's not available. There are some states, and I think Christine will talk about this a little bit later, but if you want to try homeschooling high school and decide it's not working for you and want to take advantage of public school enrollment, some states make that transition easier than other states do. So know what your options are so you do not later feel surprised or trapped.
Great. Thank you for that. Let's touch on love of learning, which we are kind of talking about a little bit here, but just fully round that out, and then we'll dive into the next topic. Kimberly, I think you wanted to talk about this.
Unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, the love of learning is going to come, I think, from, well, primarily from your relationship. I think as you are teaching your son or daughter, if you are engaged with them and you are also engaged with the material that they're learning, I think it's going to go miles as far as helping them learn. I think that love of learning has to really start earlier. So those of you with a 7th and 8th grader, you're really looking at a time to really capture that heart for learning. You know, it's much harder to capture a junior. I'm thinking of my junior and seniors in high school and thinking, okay, they're kind of past that place, but maybe they're not. They're coming home. Maybe this is a new experience for them. And I think we've got to model that for them. We've got to model the excitement for learning new ideas. I think this is going to come mainly through your engagement with them, really. It's going to come through ways of teaching them in using using the subjects that they need to learn this year, integrating them with specifically focusing on their delights, the things that delight them and get them excited. For instance, my daughter, her science this year, she is very much into animals. We have been raising chickens this year. We have COVID chickens. We built a chicken coop once COVID started. We also bred our bunnies, so we had bunnies this year. We also, for the second year running, we had another litter of collie puppies, which we have a business now. And my daughter not only did that, but she not only breeding and raising the puppies, but she has been, she took a few weeks and did some training with the puppies, some extended training. And so we're taking her science course this year because she's not interested in learning physics. She's going to be a junior. She's completed biology, general science, and chemistry. She's just finishing her chemistry this summer. We're going to create a science called animal science or animal husbandry. And I've got to do some research and looking up a textbook to help her work through some of the textbook parts of that. But we have basically for the last 6 months been doing an animal science lab. And because that's something she is so delighted in, she is loving her learning. And I think that those are the kind of ways that I want to encourage you to think about. You know, we don't have to just go by the checklist. Yes, there are certain things that we need to accomplish for a transcript, especially if you're going off to a college level education after high school. But I think there are some ways that we can do things out of the box. We have the freedom to do. And I think that's really where the love of learning is going to come from, is allowing your students the flexibility to not have to have 6 subjects where they sit for 6 hours a day doing each subject. Getting them outside of that box is going to show them that learning can look like a myriad of different modalities and can come from different ways too. So hopefully that gave you an example of how to create that love of learning for a high school student.
Awesome. Christine, did you have something you wanted to share on this?
I would just say in high school, I think a lot of that love of learning is going to stem from their interests. And I think I was initially afraid to go with that. My kids will do 4 years of high school math in high school, but the amount of time that the intensity is not equally distributed. For some of them, although they did their 4 years and everything, I would encourage you to allow them to go in the direction they're really interested and to put weight where their interests and their passions lie, while you simultaneously fulfill the core requirements. Don't be afraid to let them go and pursue the stuff they love learning, but simultaneously fill the boxes that have to be filled.
Mm-hmm. So next topic is, are you here and maybe planning to return to public school? Is this temporary versus permanent? So I know, Christine, you wanted to share a little bit about that.
Well, I think that when it comes to high school, especially in Loudoun County is not a homeschool friendly high school environment. The law in Loudoun County says that if you homeschool in high school and you choose to enter the public school system, you have to start over as a freshman. That's how the law is written. You have 2 options to get around this. You can use an accredited curriculum, which I never did, but something that's accredited would be like a box of a BECA, where they just send you the box and you do the whole thing. Apparently that's an accredited curriculum. You do not have to be that constrained. You can put your own curriculum together, your own classes together, and you can take your transcript and you can send it to this company that will accredit it for you. When you have an accredited transcript, even if you did not follow an accredited curriculum, which I never followed, the county is legally obligated to allow your student in at the grade level that they're trying to enter into. Now, it's important to point out, and I think Kathleen and Lisa are going to deal with this in transcripts, I would say starting in 8th grade, please, please, please make sure and you'll need this for NCAA, you'll need it for the Common App, and you'll need it if you elect to go for an accredited transcript, please keep a list of the materials you use in each class, the textbooks, the literature books. Keep a couple of tests that they took. So we don't really do a lot of tests until we hit 8th grade. Administer a test anyway. Keep tests, keep maybe a final exam, and keep a copy of your syllabus, okay? You should be doing that whether you want to go for accredited transcript or not. You will need that if you want to do the common application. You'll need it for NCAA validation. You'll need it if you want to go to a service academy. So as you go through, probably starting in 8th grade, keep a list of all the textbooks, the literature books, the resources you've used, your syllabus, and some samples of evaluation methods. You know, whether you used a term paper, tests, keep a file of all that stuff. Did I hit it?
Yeah, so
Good. I
so
think we
you
should
did
move on.
you did a
Go
nice
ahead,
segue.
sorry.
You did a nice segue over to curriculum, courses, and co-ops. So Kimberly, why don't you take that on at the moment, and then Lisa can pipe in on that one too.
Okay, so there are a lot of ways, like Christine mentioned, the Abeka, you can do the in the box. I probably would not recommend it. I think you will end up banging your head against, and so will your children, banging your head against the wall. I liken some of those out of the box curriculums to like eating dry toast, because I think it robs the joy of learning out of these students. But that saying, if you decide that, you know what, I can't think beyond, I need somebody just to give me the box that will do all the things that I need to do, that's okay too. I think there's a whole list of curriculums out there that you can go through that I've been homeschooling since before the internet, I feel like. So I used to look at catalogs. Now I can look at things online. Kathy Duffy is a great place to look for curriculum recommendations. I think we also have things such as there's Abeka, there's maybe some of the other moms can speak to some of these. I never use these. I always put mine own together. And one of the things I want to mention is that for high school, one of the beauties is that you can kind of mix and match. This year, for instance, and I usually do this with my students as through high school, is some of the things that I'm not real strong at. I'm not real strong at sciences. I'm not a science girl, but I love history. I love literature. I love languages. So I usually farm out my sciences. My husband taught chemistry to my daughter this past year, and he usually likes to teach the sciences. So I let him do that. If you don't have a husband that teaches science, there are great co-ops. Good. The Rainbow Resource Center. That's great, Lisa. There's some great co-ops in the area that you can actually join. My daughter is doing a economics and personal finance class through a local co-op that we're homeschool co-op. She's also now dual enrolled through Liberty Online. And so she's going to actually accomplish at 15, 16, her 4 of her college level general education courses this next year. She's going to be doing her English 101, English 102, and she's going to be doing a couple of different maths. So we are actually working on, through dual enrollment, beginning to get her college education courses beginning to take those taken care of as a junior in high school. There are other dual enrollment places you can go to through, I know in Northern Virginia, there's the Northern Virginia Community Colleges that offer dual enrollment. There Regent College. I'm sure there's a whole host of other ones. If you just look out online, there's more probably happening every day with COVID happening. So I also, though, then still like to be engaged with my high school students. So I always pick 1 or 2 subjects that I'm actually digging in and really teaching with them. And this year I'm teaching my daughter American history. I'm actually using a college American history textbook that we are going to be reading through, and she's going to be writing essays, and we're going to be doing discussion. I have in the past pulled in other people using we've been doing co-ops in our home with a group of families that were kind of like-minded, using the omnibus curriculum, which is history and worldview, philosophy, and literature. Reading the books. Tapestry of Grace is another integrated curriculum. One of the things I want to mention about teaching high school is to allow, like Christine was mentioning, about allowing your students to spend more weight of their time on those things that really interest them. The way to really accomplish that, obviously math kind of stands alone and science stands alone, but those humanities can kind of be integrated together. You can integrate some of the history of science, history, literature, worldview, apologetics, philosophy. You can integrate those and kind of knock out two birds with one stone, so to speak, or even three birds, and use a research and writing project assignment to suffice for, because you're the teacher. If you're the teacher, you can count that towards their history and their literature and composition class. It doesn't have to be one writing project for history, one writing project for their literature, one writing project for for another course. You can kind of see how the more you can integrate your subjects and your assignments, the better off your students going to learn. The better off they're going to learn, because they're going to learn these topics at a much deeper level. You're going to learn a few things really well versus scattershotting their attention and their time over a whole host of topics, and feel like you have to do all of those categories and spend hours doing each subject, when you can integrate them, freeing them up to really study what really interests and delights them.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I know, and we even talked about that going from the early grades, because some of you all who signed up for this session have younger students as well. So integrating as much as you can, it gives them an understanding of how, like, kind of the world really is all integrated. So that's a great way to put it there at the end. How about you, Lisa? Any thoughts on this curriculum, courses, co-ops?
Yeah, so when I had kids starting high school, I looked at both the high school graduation requirements for where we lived, because those were the kids my students would be competing against for college admissions. And then I looked at the college admissions requirements for about a half dozen colleges. Spectrum of selectivity. The schools that my husband and I attended, a couple others I thought my kids might be interested in, the state flagship for where I lived. And I built from that what I thought they needed to do as a basis. So let me hit what that is. For me, it's try to do 4 core subjects: English, math, science, history or social studies, every year of high school. There's a little bit of wiggle room in a couple of those categories, but start with that as your premise. 3 years of foreign language. So for English, it should be every year. Pretty much every college is going to expect 4 years of English. That is reading and writing together. The literature can be fiction, it can be nonfiction, essays, speeches, poetry, plays, and drama can be in there. Vocabulary study and grammar are not typically considered standalone high school classes. So if that's something that you're doing in the lower grades, that's awesome. Don't have grammar as a standalone single credit for high school level. Grammar can be integrated in. What I did is when I corrected my kids' papers, I was like, hey, remember this thing. Punctuation, same idea. For math, high school math is typically considered algebra and above. I said 4 years, that's a great goal, go for that, but get your kid through algebra 2. So algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, it could be integrated where geometry is piled in with the rest of it. But if you're using a sequence like that, you will want to continue using that type of sequence for 3 years to get the whole sweep of math that curriculum uses. Advanced maths include things like pre-calculus, trigonometry, statistics, calculus. Be sensitive to where your kid is and what they're ready for right now. Kids often fall apart when they get to college, and it's because their foundation of algebra was weak. And so they've moved along, and then they hit a point where they just can't keep doing it anymore. So make those foundations really strong: fractions, algebra, equations, and that will really pay off later. It's not a race to calculus. For science, you want at least 2 lab sciences. The typical high school science courses, Kimberly mentioned this earlier, biology, chemistry, physics. There's room for adopting your own plan there, though. Other courses, oceanography, zoology, botany, physical geography, which is a geography, oceanography, meteorology. It's not cultures and where capitals are. Environmental science, there's a lot out there in that vein now. When you're picking a science curriculum, look closely at the expectation for math fluency. There are conceptual science courses that have very little math. Those might be really appropriate for either pre-high school work or for a ninth grader who isn't done with their algebra studies yet and might not be ready for a science that presumes an ability to balance equations. When you get to courses like physics, there are physics courses that are algebra based and physics courses that are calculus based. Make sure you've assessed what your kid's ready for, and that's the type you're getting. For labs, look for opportunities for your student to develop a lab that either figures out what happens when a variable is changed or tests a hypothesis. Often the labs that are in science books are really more of a demonstration. It's an add vinegar to baking soda, see what happens. Okay, take that. What if you add more vinegar? What if you add more baking soda? What if there's salt water involved? You know, work on changing things and measuring what happens when there is a change. If you're just looking at a demonstration, the internet's your friend. Do a video of it. You can see bigger, fancier explosions of things that way. For history and social studies, there's a lot of curriculum, homeschool curriculum, that like using a 4-year cycle through history. Some of the curriculums that have been mentioned, like Omnibus and Tapestry of Grace, lean into that. You can also explore history geographically, through a region, American history, European history. World history tends to be a very fast motorcycle through the museum survey course. You're not going to have time to do really in-depth study in a single year world history course. So just understand what you're getting and that it meets your goals. Social studies also includes other disciplines like economics, government, and human or cultural geography. This is an area where you can really dig in according to your kid's interests. So for example, I have a kid who's really interested in East Asia. That's his major in college. In high school, he did a semester of Japan studies, a semester of Korea studies. Those were both online courses through a 4-year college. And then he did a semester of Chinese history through someone who had advanced knowledge in that category. So his transcript is actually transcripted with 7 or 8 different credits in history social studies, and that's totally fine. His electives were just in that area. For foreign language, there's a lot of options out there that are online. Foreign language should include speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So if you're using something that has a lot of a holistic Duolingo, Mango, Rosetta Stone type approach to learning the language, I recommend you also get a grammar book and also find original source material like low-level newspaper articles that the student can read. And they need to be working on producing the language, not just passively understanding it. American Sign Language is typically acceptable. Colleges will almost always accept ancient languages, including Latin, for admissions. They do not always meet the college graduation requirements, but there's only, I did an in-depth research on this a couple years ago. I could only find one college that stated they would not take Latin, and even that one I found exceptions for. Constructed languages like Elvish and Esperanto and Klingon are not typically acceptable for the world language requirement. And then as you're looking for your materials, look for samples, sample lessons, sample course plans. The publishers will usually put this out. A lot of times you can find them by doing an image search with the name of the thing you're looking for. Contact the publisher and ask for samples. If they're a homeschool curriculum provider, they will often send you a sample chapter, a sample video lesson that's been recorded. So you can see if that matches what you're looking for and what your kids' inclinations are. So that's your 4 cores, your languages, and then you add electives in. Those can be all sorts of things that your kid is interested in. It could be art, it could be music, computer science. It could be doubling up on foreign languages, taking a 3rd or 4th language, drama, applied STEM. And you can create a credit that is a compilation of several different things. So I had a fine arts credit that was a combination of theater performances, music performances, museum trips, workshops on art and architecture, and all those things together became that credit in fine art. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, outside providers, whether that is an online course that you're doing or a co-op, pick those things very deliberately, because my experience, and I think the experience of a lot of families, is that outside deadline becomes the do or die deadline. And if it's something that you really aren't caring about so much, you can become resentful of the fact that that deadline is trumping the algebra assignment that you want the kid to do, or the English paper you want them to write, when they say, oh, but I have a graphic arts assignment that I have to have done tomorrow, and so I need to spend the next 6 hours working on that. So pick those things deliberately. For some of my kids, it was things that they wanted to do really advanced work in. For one of my kids, it was the thing that I'm really, really good at, but he didn't like learning from me. So he was motivated to come to me and say, can we do chemistry? Can we do math together? He would never come to me and say, let's do English, which is what I have an undergraduate degree in. So just make the outside providers your tool. Don't be their servant. And that's pretty much my fast talking through that.
Okay, great. That was great information. Christine, I know you had mentioned something about, your thoughts on graduating early and alternatives to college. Can you roll those two together? We're getting down to, we've got 10 minutes, 13 minutes left. So if you roll those two together before we hit college prep and transcripts.
I would not, if for what it's worth, I would not rush through high school. There's a lot that can be done in high school, and there's actually a lot of college that can be done in high school, and it can typically be done at a much lower cost than at a 4-year institution. I also don't think you should be afraid of not going to college. I have 2 at Cornell. What they're doing at that school requires a college degree, and it makes sense for them to go to college, but there are so many career opportunities that do not require college, and college can sometimes be actually a hurdle to getting into these careers. We read a book called Skip College. I think I gave the reference to Kathleen. I worked with a girl this past year in high school who actually could not pass the test to enlist in the Air Force, but was accepted to 3 colleges. That ought to give you pause about the value of those particular colleges. I guess I would just encourage you, even in your high school, if you have a kid who you think, and not going to college is not an indication of intellect at all. Plenty of really ignorant, stupid people graduate from college every year. But if you have a kid who you really don't think would thrive in a college environment, start exploring alternatives. I have one son who I mentioned earlier. He's going to become a luthier, which is a fancy word for a guitar builder. That involves an apprenticeship, which he's going to do out in Seattle. He's also doing a certificate program at Nova for production and recording. Look at what they're interested in. Ask a lot of questions. He spent a summer building houses in South America with a friend. So investigate other opportunities. That building and construction is actually part of the business plan that he's going to have long term, that fits into the guitar world. But don't be afraid to ask about electrician, plumbing, construction. In particular, one degree that is highly overrated is computer science. It is not hard to get a job in the computer industry without a bachelor's degree. It's actually frequently sometimes easier. There are many certificate programs that you can do in the computer industry to show that you've mastered certain computer languages. And I've spoken to several people who hire in the computer industry, and they say that they know within 2 or 3 minutes whether or not the person they're looking at knows what they want them to know, and that these certificates are frequently more useful than a bachelor's degree in IT. A lot of the computer science degrees are far more philosophical and less practical. So I would just encourage you not to be afraid to look at other avenues. I think that we're in a real structural change in our economy. Colleges are going out of business, some of them as a result of COVID, and it may be that they need to. So be willing to investigate other avenues. There's a lot of them out there. And yeah, and that book was really helpful. If you read that book, I think it's super helpful.
Okay, the book was called
Can I
Skip College.
say, yeah, Skip College. There's one more thing Lisa mentioned that my older boys did, the college ones. One of my sons did 3 foreign languages in high school. And don't be afraid of flexibility. In order to do that, because clearly I'm not equipped to instruct Chinese, he did study, like she said, he was on a very rigid timetable with some of those classes. Don't be afraid to let them go. In order to do that, he did math year round. There was no way he was going to finish calculus in 9 months while he was doing 3 languages and history and literature and whatever else we were doing. So don't be afraid of going outside the rigidity of the school year. He just did math year round because that's how we finished it, in order to optimize on the stuff that he really loved. So
Yeah. And one other thing that you mentioned earlier when we were talking was the fact that and you mentioned this kind of just now, but don't feel like you need to get your kids through high school so quickly, because there's so many opportunities in the high school time frame that they have. Like, my daughter went to an architecture camp. There's certain things that they only have available to them during high school, and the high school years can be really, really rich. I'm not saying don't graduate your kids early if there's some reason that you want to or need to, but then in college, especially if you dual enroll during high school, they're going to get through the college years really quickly, which will be less expensive. But college can be really expensive, and maybe you do want to get through college more quickly to move on to whatever your career is. But high school is a time for some really rich, wonderful learning if you can spend the full time there, or maybe even more time. Somebody was asking about doing 5 years in one of the questions. So that was
wait, let me just tell you something.
Yeah.
That doing high school longer, I don't know the ins and outs of that. If you have an NCAA athlete, that is off the table. You have 4 years of high school. If you intend to compete at a D1 level, I don't know about D2, but
Okay.
if you're aiming for a D1 athletic situation, you must have only 4 years of high school, or you lose your eligibility.
Ooh, good point. Yeah, no, thank you. Somebody was asking about if they did 5 years, how do they put that on a 4-year transcript? But in terms of this topic, that's a good point. So let's move on, because we're running out of time here, to college prep, transcripts. Lisa, you talked about that a little bit. I'll just kind of jump on that, and then maybe you can talk about that a little more. But I started, like you, I looked at the program of studies for our county. It could be by state if you're in a different state, but pull up your public school system, program of studies, or graduation requirements. And that's how I started. It was very clear what the people in my county the kids in my county, the high schoolers, were going to be required for a standard diploma, which would be like a college prep diploma, and then advanced studies diploma, which would be college prep diploma. So it was very clear how many Englishes, how many maths, that kind of thing were required for the 2 different kinds of diplomas. And one thing that Christine talked about when we were talking earlier was don't limit your kids. You don't want to take options off the table because they may surprise you. They may come around later in college. You may not think they're going to be in high school. You may not think they're college bound, but then something happens, they start taking some dual enrolled gen eds, general education credits, and realize that they found their passion and they do want to go to college. So don't take options off the table for either college or other options. But that is how I started doing our high school, figuring out what we were going to cover in high school. Then we did a lot of co-ops, we did a lot of outside teachers. One thing, Lisa, that you mentioned that I do have a question on, maybe you can cover it here, is if someone does create their own 1 credit course or even a half a credit course, bundling, like you said, the art, the music, the museum, the different things. I know in Loudoun County, it says a credit is 140 instructional hours. And I know that's a question I get a lot, is how do I know what a credit is, or how do I know what a full class is? Can you just talk to that as well as whatever else you want to share about this topic?
Sure. So 140 is not a bad guideline. I think Carnegie units are, which is usually what you're talking about when you say a credit, I think is 120 is the minimum. Half of that for a half credit class. So you could have multiple half credit classes on a transcript. So I mentioned the Japan studies and the Korea studies. I think I put those both as half credit classes. I had another student that did a half credit of Shakespeare and a half credit of writing. So a full credit of English for the year, but not a full credit of the exact same thing. Did that answer it?
Yeah. When I did this with my kids, it was 120 hours for a credit as well. But for some reason, Loudoun County now says 140. But you get the gist. You're the one who's creating the class, so create it around those time frames, those hours for a full credit versus a half credit. But would you go ahead and just talk about college, if there's more to college prep, transcripts?
So
we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, I want to leave room for the socialization, because I think that's really important. So really briefly, I'm just going to say there's about 4 documents that a counselor produces, a homeschool counselor produces for their kid. It's transcripts, course descriptions, school profile, and a counselor recommendation. Not every college wants to see every one of those, so know where your kid is applying to before you dig into the work of doing those. Transcript is a 1-page, maybe 2-page. It's essentially a complicated table that shows the courses that were completed, the credits awarded, the grade, and the year it was done. That's really all it is. And you repeat that for each grade, or it's organized by subject. Course descriptions explain what each of those items was, because with Loudoun County or Fairfax County or North Carolina, there's some government entity that says what Algebra 1 or what German 1 consisted of. They don't necessarily know that when they're reviewing a homeschool application. So it's a paragraph. I can fit between 3 and 5 of them on a page. I think I got all the math credits on a single page. It does not need to be pages and pages long. Then the school profile is essentially 1 to 2 pages of the philosophy of your school. Public schools do this. It explains the school demographics, what they are requiring of students, what students have available to them. It's a little bit different for homeschoolers because they're usually in a one-of-one situation, but this is your philosophy and framework document. And then the recommendation is what you write about that particular student that you are supporting the application for. There's lots of examples of these on the internet. HSLDA has some. This is some of the work that I do. There's homeschool support groups that are assisting with this as well. So don't feel intimidated by transcripts. I have 2 college students right now. They were all widely accepted by colleges with a transcript I did on my computer and I signed. It doesn't even need to be notarized. And everything from George Mason to University of Virginia to Notre Dame to Stanford accepted them. They're on full tuition scholarships. You don't have to go outside. You do not have to have an accredited transcript for a homeschooler to have a successful college admission.
Great, great. Yeah, I have a lot to say on transcripts as well, but we don't really have time for that. One thing that I will say though, when you're in 7th, 8th grade, just start, keep in mind, really 9th for sure, start making sure you're tracking your grades, your credits, taking the little course descriptions or creating a course description. What texts are you using? What literature are they reading? And just start compiling that document that that Lisa was just talking about. So you're gonna have your transcript, and then you're gonna have kind of like your own program of studies of what your child actually studied, with little blurbs about that, what it encompassed or entailed, and then texts, literature, that kind of thing. All right, so let's jump over to socialization, sports.
I want to
extracurriculars.
add, I'm going to add this in because it's going to make me nuts. On that transcript, if you want to designate something as an AP class, it must be approved by the college board. It is not hard to create your own AP class. You can simply register as a teacher with the college board. You don't need any professional certification. You can take one of the one of the syllabus that they already have approved and adopt it as your own. You can write your own, okay? But if you write a transcript and you put AP next to that, you can only do that if it is an approved transcript from the college board, okay? What we did when we designated something as honors was we had some way to prove that it was honors. What we used for that was SAT subject tests. You don't have to do any of this, but what it meant for us was when we did a class that I thought was honors level, we kind of validated it with an SAT subject test. But I don't think you should be intimidated by AP. It's a very doable process. You do need to register for those exams in the fall with your local public school. And there, sorry.
No, that's great. I mean, I do agree with you. I felt like if we sent our transcript to a college admissions, they're going to be like, I don't really know. You're the homeschool mom. You're saying this is what your child got, A's and B's, whatever. So we validated with community college courses, letters of reference from college professors, the SATs, the ACTs, all those kinds of things, and validated the fact that, okay, yeah, my student actually was an AB student. But taking this transcript at face value without anything else kind of supporting it, you know, if I was an admissions counselor, I probably wouldn't. So you want to look for ways to validate. So that's a good point. All right, so socialization, sports, extracurriculars. Kimberly, you wanted to talk about this a little bit, and Lisa?
I don't have, I wouldn't say I have extensive knowledge because I only know what we have worked through, what we have done. My kids were highly focused on debate, moot court and mock trial through their high school years. And the good thing is about those kind of extracurricular activities is they do add to their learning, their education significantly. And additionally, those things are still being held online, which is great for homeschoolers. Because it's not a physical contact sport, I think they are getting creative. The leagues, the speech and debate, moot court, mock trial leagues are figuring out right now how to conduct these competitions online. So that's one option for you. Another idea I had, because I think there was a question about how do I set my son or daughter up, set them apart from other students on their resume or transcript through their extracurriculars. And one of the things I think people forget about is community service. There are lots of opportunities for community service right now. And I know obviously with the COVID, there's certain restrictions that we're having to work around, but I know our local Tree of Life food pantry is asking for people to help with food distribution, helping make meals. And one of those things I think that really helps them stand out to college admissions counselors is how are they engaging? They can write Key Club or, Corral on their, basically just show up once a week to a meeting. And that doesn't really show the admissions counselor that they're self-learning, self-starting, self-motivating, but engaging with community service, I think, is one thing that helps them really stand out among their peers. So there's lots of different opportunities. You can start Googling what are some, community service ideas that you could do during this COVID time. I know that local food pantries are really trying to help. There are a lot of local churches, and our churches is doing food distribution So that's just one idea that I know of. Another way for students to set themselves apart is starting their own business. My daughter is, she is very much integrated with with our dog breeding business, and she actually made a considerable amount of money towards her own car this summer by actually offering training services, dog training that she's, this is something she's really interested in. So she created a dog training business where she's offering dog training to our neighbors, to other people. She's putting it out there online. And she actually did have a couple of new puppies that we bred, that she created her own training curriculum and scope and sequence, so to speak, and kind of came up with her her business plan for that. So I think students having their own self-started, self-initiated businesses really looks very strong because these are real world situations. These aren't just made up high school club that you can join. These are actually practical that prove that they're going to be able to be successful beyond, college and beyond.
Can I, Kathleen, everything that Kimberly is talking about, I think that one thing that's a little bit harder for homeschoolers is to get the bells and whistles, which I've referred to as, but I would strongly encourage homeschoolers to look into that congressional award, because everything that Kimberly is talking about fills the requirements for that congressional award. But there's nothing like going down to the Senate floor and being awarded a gold medal for what you should be doing anyway. The categories of that include volunteer service, personal development, physical fitness, and some kind of expedition outdoor activity. Now, even my son, who is at this point in time not heading to college, he just finished his real estate licensing exams, and he was picked up by an agent. And one of the reasons that they were intrigued with him is that he was a Boy Scout Eagle and he was a gold congressional award winner. So if you're going to be doing these things, which you really ought to be doing to prepare your kid for life anyway, get the outside validation. Sorry, I'm beating a dead horse. But to the extent that it's available, if you're going to put the time into building your own business, get the validation for it. And the Congressional Award is awarded at 3 certificate levels, 3 medal levels. And every time that you can put that, even if you're not going to college, it opened doors for my son just in getting a great intro real estate guy to take him on board. But I think that validating and those official things are super helpful to us. And so I would encourage you, you're eligible to enroll in the congressional at age 13. These are things you probably ought to be doing with your children anyway, to teach them just how to become adults. So get the credit for it. Again, it's not just she started a business, it's she started a business and it was recognized under this thing. So,
oh my gosh, that's so amazing. I wish I had really known about that, or I think I had heard about it, but I hadn't like fully grasped it. So now I'm kicking myself because my kids did have their own businesses.
But hindsight's always 20/20. And without you taking me by the hand, I am forever in your debt. But I would just encourage you, to the extent that you're able, but don't become a slave to it, but get these outside free things to validate the hard work that your kids are doing.
Well, and like you said, they're already doing it. So you're integrating, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're already doing a lot of these pieces to the Congressional Award. Why not actually?
I mean, the overlap that my boys had in getting their Eagle Scout done and the Congressional, that Congressional is really fantastic. And I'm going to say there is nothing like going down on the Senate floor and having the Speaker of the House award it to. It's really a pretty epic moment. So Kimberly, you need to look into this, because that girl is working and she deserves her little bells and whistles.
Okay, so thank you both for that. How about you, Lisa? Anything on the extracurricular stuff?
Yeah, so I would suggest that homeschoolers remember that homeschooling defines your education mode. It doesn't define who you are friends with. And I think sometimes homeschoolers feel very lonely because they're looking for a unicorn. They want someone else who homeschools like soccer, Model UN, and tinkering with a 3D printer, when maybe what they want to look for instead are a couple friends who are homeschoolers, some people who kick the soccer ball around, one older person who can mentor the 3D printing, and hanging out with the friends of the library that are 65 and 70-year-olds. So don't feel like your fellowship needs to be constrained by how you're doing school. I would say that for my older two kids, the bulk of their friendships came from Scouts and sports and Model United Nations. Those were not necessarily people they were doing academics with. And in the case of sports and Scouts, most of those other youth were not homeschooled at all. There's a lot of sports opportunities that are not high school based. So look for things that have a club structure, USA Swimming, martial arts, gymnastics, rec center teams, running clubs, cycling, hockey, things where the bulk of the competition is not coming through that public high school. Scouts, youth groups, religious youth groups, boys and girls clubs, all of those are options, and a lot of them have some form of an advancement structure that can provide leadership opportunities and a march through from easy things to harder things, much like the Congressional Award. Volunteering, get out and do the stuff that you want to do to make the world better. Don't limit yourself to things that are only youth-oriented. I mentioned Friends of the Library. My kids are the schleppers for the book sales. So it is a lot of senior citizens who are not wanting to tote around 50-pound boxes of books. And so my teens are in there moving boxes of books around, setting up tables. They help with the sales. And it's a cross-generational experience for them. The other thing I will say is, if there's something that your kid really wants to do, I can't promise that if you build it, they will come, but if you're there and will lean into being responsible for the advising, the coaching, doing the adult support, you have a chance of your kid having a structure for something to occur. Many of the homeschool teams that my kids were on only existed because there was a current parent or a former parent who'd said, my kid wants to do this and I'm going to find some people to do it with. Examples of those, Gen Cyber is a cybersecurity online competition. Maryland Engineering Challenge, which is the industry museum in Baltimore, and they'll accept people from Virginia. Model United Nations, Science Olympiad, Oceanography Bowl, Envirothon, Computational Linguistics Olympiad, Math Counts, Poetry Out Loud, and robotics competitions. That is just a sampling of some things that either my family participated in or we had friends who participated in. So put yourself out there. There's a lot of Facebook groups say, my kid wants to build a model cargo ship. Would anybody else like to build a battery-powered model cargo ship with my kid? It's going to be, 6 feet long. Let's do it.
Yeah, a lot of times you have to create these things yourself. Lisa, are you going to list a lot of those things in the document that you mentioned?
Yeah, I'll put all of this into the notes.
Okay, perfect. I am really grateful to you all. I've learned things that I wish I had learned prior to homeschool. I'm not saying anything, but I'm really grateful for you all sharing this, because for those who are going to watch this recording whose kids are in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, they are now going to have such valuable insights to now decide and process through how they want to work all of this out for their high school career for their kids. So thank you to all the panelists. I'm going to try to get you all up on the screen again. Thank you so much. And thank you to those who are watching this live and who are watching this as a recording. I'm going to go to this last slide, which has everyone's contact information. And if you have any questions for anyone in particular, so I can get my thing a little smaller here, then please reach out to the appropriate person. And Lisa, I do believe you said that you would even offer a follow-on to this, which would be like a college prep kind of session.
Yeah, I'm doing the research for a series of webinars that'll be informational about the curriculum to do, not specific curriculum, but that sweep of courses to do for high school and some of the basics of college admissions. So if you go to the Admissions Decrypted Facebook page, that's where I'll do notices for that.
Okay, great. And I can put that in the email that I send out to everybody. So, all right, once again, thank you to all the panelists and thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you for your participation, and just hope you have a great homeschooling year and homeschooling career with your students. Take care.